Would you dare to work at a company where basically everything you say gets recorded?
Recorded.
Yeah, recorded. And not just recorded, but actually rated by everyone else in the room live,
Oh,
including your boss. Even if you're the CEO, your ideas get rated.
wow, that sounds uh, pretty intense, maybe even confronting, right?
Exactly. But this whole system, the seemingly brutal level of transparency and, well, accountability, that's the foundation Ray Dalio used to build Bridgewater Associates, one of the most successful hedge funds, well, ever.
And that provocative idea, that willingness to face uncomfortable truths right head on. That's really our jumping off point for this deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just talking finance here or just investing strategies.
Yeah.
We're really exploring a whole fundamental system for thinking and for living that Dalio developed, a system he essentially engineered.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive. Today, we are unpacking the mind of Ray Dalio. We're drawing our insights specifically from the source material Ray Dalio, Engineering Life and Wealth by Principle.
And our mission here, it's more than just trying to figure out how a billionaire investor operates.
Right. It's about exploring this unique system he created, this very deliberate process of kind of programming his life like a machine. And he did it through relentlessly developing and applying these things he called principles.
Think of it maybe as a shortcut to
Mm-hmm.
understanding a really powerful mindset.
Mhm.
It's almost like an industrial process applied to life itself.
Yeah.
We'll look at how Dalio's approach to dealing with uncomfortable truths, how he prioritized logic and data, and how he rigorously wrote down these principles.
Yeah.
How all that became a blueprint, not just for market success, but really for achieving this deep clarity in what often feels like a chaotic world.
And hopefully understanding this can offer some, real insights for how you approach challenges and decisions in your own life.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Ray Dalio, he didn't exactly start out, destined to manage hundreds of billions of dollars.
No, not at all. The source mentions he was born in Queens, New York, back in 1949. Pretty ordinary background.
Right. His dad was a jazz musician, mom a homemaker. Money wasn't exactly flowing freely, but what he did have apparently was this early, almost insatiable curiosity.
And that curiosity, it got sparked around age 12, according to the source. He started caddying at a local golf club.
Caddying. Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about earning a few bucks. It was the exposure. He was hearing these, quiet, well-dressed guys talking about stocks, interest rates, market cycles, things completely outside his world at the time.
So he's hearing these Wall Street types talk shop on the golf course.
Exactly. And it just captured his imagination. He's hearing how money was made, how businesses worked, and it really, really piqued his interest.
And that led him, at 12 years old, to make his first investment.
Yeah, his very first stock purchase. He bought shares in Northeast Airlines.
Northeast Airlines. Why them?
Well, the source says it was almost random. He picked it simply because it was the only company he'd heard of trading under $5 a share. Plus, he'd overheard some talk it might merge with another airline.
And what happened?
Astonishingly, that small kind of naive investment, it tripled pretty quickly.
Wow. Talk about beginner's luck.
Right. Pure and simple. But you can imagine how that planted a seed. That easy success must have felt like magic. A huge contrast to the grinding lessons he'd learned down the road.
So he eventually gets his degrees, but it sounds like he was really learning by just soaking up everything about the markets.
Yeah, and he founded Bridgewater Associates in 1975. Started it from a two-bedroom apartment in New York. He was only in his mid-20s then.
Full of ambition, I imagine.
Oh, totally. He had ambition, some clients, some early ideas about trading, but the crucial piece was still missing. He didn't yet have that robust, systematic way of thinking needed to handle the market's, sheer complexity and unpredictability.
And that lack of a solid system, that leads us directly to this pivotal moment, right? This catastrophic failure in 1982. This is where the story gets really interesting.
Yeah, it's a dramatic turn. The economic climate back then was pretty uncertain. And Dalio, he made this huge, incredibly bold prediction. He predicted a global depression was coming. Imminent.
And he wasn't quiet about it?
No way. He went very public. National television appearances, writing these long papers, warning everyone who'd listen that the economy was basically on the verge of collapse. He compared it to the lead up to the Great Depression. He was absolutely certain he was right.
There wasn't.
He was spectacularly wrong. The market didn't crash. Instead, it surged. It kicked off a massive bull run.
Ouch. And the consequences for him in Bridgewater?
Devastating.
Yeah.
Just devastating. His clients, who'd believed his dire forecasts, they were positioned all wrong. lost money. So naturally, they pulled their investments. He had to lay off all his employees, everyone he'd hired. Imagine that, and personally. The source highlights just how bad it got. He was so broke, he actually had to borrow $4,000 from his dad just to cover living expenses.
Wow, that's absolutely crushing. To be so publicly wrong, lose everything.
Yeah, he even admitted later, looking back, something like, "I was so arrogant, I thought I could see the future."
But that moment, that total collapse, it became the turning point.
The absolute turning point of his life and career. It really could have been the end. But instead of quitting or, blaming the market or other people, he did something fundamentally different. He forced himself into this rigorous, painful, but deeply honest process of self-reflection.
He didn't just ask, why was my forecast wrong?
Exactly. He went deeper. He asked, what went wrong in my thinking process? Why did I make that mistake?
And this is where we get that formula, the one that shaped everything for him. Pain plus reflection equals progress.
Precisely. He realized the intense pain of that failure wasn't just, bad luck. It was a signal, vital feedback from reality itself, an opportunity, really.
But just feeling the pain wasn't enough.
Nope. You had to pair it with deep, honest reflection. Understand the underlying causes of the pain to really extract the lesson. And this was the moment he started consciously, deliberately writing things down.
The source says, like a scientist recording a failed experiment.
Yeah, exactly like that. He began meticulously documenting what he believed, the decisions he made based on those beliefs, what actually happened, what worked, and critically, what didn't work. He started building this written log of his mistakes and the lessons learned.
So, moving away from gut feelings and emotions.
Totally. He stopped relying on just his intuition or fleeting feelings and started focusing on identifying recurring patterns, analyzing the real outcomes of his decisions, and basing future actions on the data and logic derived from this intense self-study.
He was essentially trying to reprogram his own mind.
You could absolutely say that, trying to build a more reliable internal mechanism for dealing with reality's inherent uncertainty. That 1982 failure didn't destroy him. It fundamentally reprogrammed him.
Taught him humility, which he admitted he lacked.
Big time. And it revealed the absolutely indispensable value of having reliable, testable systems for making decisions when you just don't know what's going to happen next.
So the whole principle-driven culture at Bridgewater, the system that eventually managed, over $150 billion, it wasn't born from some flash of genius or market success.
No. It was born directly out of personal collapse, out of that painful, brutal honesty that followed the failure. He literally turned pain into the engine of progress.
Which brings us right to the core of the system he built. Principles.
Yes, principles. But it's important to understand how Dalio defines them. They aren't just like abstract values, be kind or work hard.
Though those might be part of it.
Right, maybe. But for him, principles are concrete, actionable, testable rules for dealing with reality. They're derived from cause and effect relationships he observed and learned over time.
The source uses that great analogy like lines of code in a personal operating system, or maybe a guidebook for life.
Exactly. So when you face a situation, especially a tough one, something complex or unfamiliar, you don't just react based on your gut or your immediate emotion or what feels comfortable.
You consult your principles.
You consult your principles.
Yeah.
You ask, okay, based on what I've learned from past experiences and my reflections, what's the established rule, the framework, that should guide my decision or action right now? It's about having this go-to reference built from tested lessons.
And he didn't just jot down a few ideas. He built a massive, evolving internal playbook of these rules, decades worth.
Constantly adding to it. Every mistake, his or anyone else's at Bridgewater, every success, every difficult conversation, every major market event, it all became raw material. An opportunity to refine existing principles or write new ones. These codified rules became the absolute intellectual foundation of Bridgewater.
And crucially, they didn't just sit on a shelf. They built software to embed them into daily work.
Yeah, that's what was really unprecedented. They built custom software to integrate these principles directly into the firm's day-to-day decision-making, hiring, investing analysis, handling conflicts.
So if an employee was facing a tough call,
they could literally use digital tools that would reference and apply Dalio's documented principles to help guide them. It really was like living and working inside what the source calls a real-time philosophy engine. The company's cumulative wisdom was actively shaping present actions.
And Dalio wanted the whole organization thinking this way, right? Like a system.
Yes, that was the goal. He wanted everyone prioritizing logic, empirical evidence, transparency. He saw those as essential for navigating complexity effectively. He wanted to understand how reality works, the underlying mechanics.
Like economics or organizations or even just human behavior.
Exactly. And then design robust, repeatable systems for himself and for Bridgewater to deal with that reality effectively, predictably even.
That quote captures it. I want to understand how reality works, then design systems to deal with it effectively.
And the way they handle failure is maybe the clearest illustration of this systematic approach.
Right. You contrast it with a typical company.
In a typical place, someone fails on a project. Maybe it gets ignored awkwardly, maybe there's blame, maybe someone gets fired. It's often messy and emotional.
But at Bridgewater.
It triggered a specific, systematic response. First, document exactly what happened, not just the outcome, the whole process leading up to it.
Then the deep dive.
Right. Rigorous root cause analysis. Why did this happen? Was it the individual skill? Or, more often, was it a flaw in the underlying system, the process, maybe even the principle that guided the decision?
And once they found the root cause,
They'd refine an existing principle or write a brand new one, specifically designed to prevent that type of failure from happening again. Failure wasn't punished, it was systematically studied.
like scientists studying failed experiments, not for blame, but to learn and improve the method.
Exactly. It turned failure from something to be feared into a direct pathway for progress and optimizing the whole system.
And this whole objective, engineering-like approach was aimed squarely at overcoming what Dalio saw as a huge human flaw, our inability to see ourselves and others objectively.
Yes, our biases, our emotions, our ego, the stories we tell ourselves, they constantly get in the way of clear thinking, of seeing reality as it actually is, without distortion.
Which is why his principles included these almost algorithmic rules to counteract that subjectivity.
Rules like, don't confuse what you wish were true with what is really true. Sounds simple, right? But incredibly hard to actually live by when your wishes are strong.
Or make your decisions based on probabilities. Not hopes, not feelings, but the most likely outcomes based on data and cause and effect.
And then there are process principles, like the famous use the 5-step process to get what you want out of life. He saw that as a universal algorithm for achieving goals. We definitely need to unpack that one later.
Now, this highly objective, rational, almost depersonalized way of thinking, it could sound kind of cold, right? Maybe even dehumanizing to some.
It definitely gets perceived that way, especially from the outside looking in. And the source acknowledges that perception. But from Dalio's perspective, it was actually liberating.
Liberating how?
By removing the noise. The office politics, the drama, the distortions caused by ego. It allowed for maximum clarity and, ultimately, more effective decision-making. He wasn't trying to create robots. He was trying to design a life and a business that could intelligently learn from reality, adapt quickly, and constantly evolve by minimizing all that subjective interference.
And that relentless, systematic approach to learning from everything, especially failure, that's what turned Bridgewater into what he called a learning machine.
Which leads us perfectly into maybe the most famous and definitely the most debated part of Bridgewater's culture, radical truth and radical transparency.
Yeah, back to that opening idea, the expectation, the requirement even, that you challenge your boss, anyone, even Dalio himself, publicly and on the record, if you think they're wrong.
Exactly. Most companies might talk about an open-door policy or encourage speaking up. But at Bridgewater, radical truth and transparency weren't just suggestions. They were absolute, non-negotiable operating principles baked into the system.
Okay, let's break them down like the source does. Radical truth first. That means telling the uncomfortable truth directly. No sugarcoating.
Right. If someone's idea seems weak, you're expected to explain why you think it's weak, clearly, directly. If a manager isn't performing well, they get direct, often difficult feedback. If you mess up, you're expected to own it openly, analyze why, no excuses.
And the why behind this seemingly harsh approach.
It comes back to Dalio's core belief. Truth, or as the source quotes him, a more precisely and accurate understanding of reality, is the absolute foundation for getting good outcomes. You just can't fix problems, learn from mistakes, or make good decisions if you're unwilling to face the honest, sometimes painful facts of what's actually going on.
Clarity over comfort.
Precisely. Honesty over politeness, if politeness obscured the truth.
Okay, then radical transparency, taking that truth and putting it out there for everyone.
Yeah, shining a bright, often uncomfortable spotlight on it, so everyone can see it, learn from it.
And in practice, that meant things like recording most meetings, audio and video.
Yep. And making those recordings accessible to others in the firm. The stated goal wasn't surveillance, but creating a shared reality, letting people learn by seeing how decisions were really made, how debates unfolded, how feedback was actually given,
Performance reviews could be public, mistakes documented in systems.
all of that. And feedback was constant, direct, and often quantified.
Which brings us to that dot collector tool. Employees rating each other live during meetings? That sounds wild. How did it work?
It was a custom app. During a meeting or discussion, employees could rate each other in real time on specific attributes, things like logic, open-mindedness, assertiveness, listening, willingness to disagree.
So as you're talking, people are tapping away on their tablets, rating you, and you could see the rating.
Often, yes, either live or right after.
Mm.
The ratings would feed into the longer-term believability scores for different areas. It was designed to be incredibly exposing.
I can imagine having your thinking judged and quantified constantly by peers, by superiors.
Absolutely, and that was the point. Dalio believed that a true idea meritocracy, where the best ideas genuinely win, regardless of who proposes them, could only function if you stripped away ego and fear.
So the constant, transparent, data-driven feedback was meant to stop people hiding behind seniority or just being polite.
Exactly. And to make weaknesses that hinder good decisions immediately visible and addressable. The goal was to get to the best answer, objectively.
And the source gives examples of this actually happening. Interns challenging Dalio, junior analysts picking apart his logic.
Yeah, compelling examples. Interns emailing him directly with disagreements, junior folks dissecting his reasoning in big meetings. And crucially, Dalio didn't just tolerate it, he actively encouraged it.
Because he knew he had blind spots too.
Right. He understood being proven wrong wasn't failure. It was an opportunity to learn and refine the principles. The source mentions times he actually changed his mind, shifted strategy, based on challenges from people much lower down. That level of intellectual humility is genuinely rare, especially in someone that successful.
But, as the source makes clear, this culture was not easy. It wasn't for everyone.
Definitely not. The source is explicit about the criticism. Many former employees found it incredibly difficult. Intense, demanding, emotionally taxing, those words come up.
Terms like cult-like were even used.
Sometimes, yes, by outsiders or former staff, describing the sheer intensity and the unique norms. That radical transparency, intended for learning, could easily feel like constant surveillance or judgment. The relentless feedback, aimed at growth, could just be overwhelming, emotionally painful for a lot of people.
Yet for those who adapted, the source also says it was transformative. Changed how they thought.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. For some, it fundamentally altered how they approached reality, decision-making, personal growth.
So Dalio saw this as a trade-off. He wasn't aiming for the most comfortable place to work.
No, his goal was effectiveness. He was trying to build this highly adaptive thinking organism that evolved fast by confronting harsh truths, learning quickly, operating with peak clarity.
Back to pain plus reflection equals progress. The culture deliberately generated both the pain of confrontation and the structure for reflection.
Exactly. It was designed to do that, individual and organizationally. Radical truth and transparency weren't slogans, they were operating principles. The ethical and intellectual backbone he thought was necessary for sustained success and for getting past ego and subjectivity.
As the source suggests, in a world where ego blocks learning, he demanded humility because only the honest can grow.
A powerful idea.
So how does all this, the principles, the radical truth, the systems thinking, actually translate into how Dalio approached life itself beyond just Bridgewater?
It really starts with that fundamental worldview we mentioned earlier, seeing things as a machine.
Right. Not chaos, but a system. Inputs, outputs, cause and effect, patterns, rules.
Exactly. And his deep belief is that if you can understand the mechanics, the cause-effect relationships governing any system, your own life, an organization, an economy, you gain the ability to engineer better outcomes.
That quote again. Think of yourself as a machine operating within a machine.
Yeah, a system within larger systems, and both can be understood and optimized. This systematic mindset really comes together in his famous 5-step process for achieving goals. He presents it as this universal algorithm for getting what you want out of life.
Conceptually simple, but hard to execute rigorously.
That's the key. The steps themselves aren't complex, but doing them with real honesty and discipline, that's the challenge.
Okay, let's walk through them. Step 1, have clear goals.
And clear means really clear, not vague stuff like be successful or be happy. Define precisely what you want to achieve. Specific, measurable, unambiguous. What does reaching the goal actually look like in reality? You need that target defined.
Step 2, identify the problems standing in your way.
This requires that radical truth. Look unflinchingly at what's blocking you from those clear goals. Confront the difficult realities, acknowledge the obstacles, and be brutally honest about your own weaknesses or mistakes contributing to the problem. No sugarcoating, no just blaming others. What are the specific roadblocks?
Step 3, diagnose the root causes of those problems.
This is the critical analytical step. Don't just identify the problem, dig deep, like a detective or a scientist. Why is this happening? What are the underlying reasons, the fundamental mechanics, the deep cause-effect relationships generating this issue? Is it a skill gap, a flawed belief, an emotional bias, a system issue? Get to the root, not just the symptom.
Step 4, design a plan to get around those problems by tackling the root causes.
Based on those root causes, you create a specific, detailed, actionable plan. Concrete steps you'll take to eliminate or mitigate those fundamental causes, clearing the path to your goal. The plan has to target the roots directly.
And finally, step 5, push through to completion.
Execution. Discipline. This is where you actually follow the plan, do the necessary work, exert the effort to remove those root causes, and move towards your goals. It's about action, not just intention.
And he sees this as a loop, right? Not just a one-time thing.
Exactly. A continuous improvement loop. You finish one cycle, you analyze the outcome. Did you hit the goal? New problems pop up. You learn from it, then you start again, maybe with a bigger goal or a deeper problem you uncovered, or just a more refined understanding of the systems you're working within.
And he applied this everywhere: Bridgewater, investing, even teaching his kids.
Yes, he presents it as a universal algorithm for achieving anything significant.
And he even extended this systematic thinking to people themselves, seeing them as machines with different specs.
Yeah, that's definitely a controversial framing for some, but it fits his model. Each person having their own assembly of strengths, weaknesses, processing styles, operational tendencies.
Which led to tools at Bridgewater to quantify and map this stuff.
Right, like the baseball cards.
Tell us more about those.
So employees at a certain level had these detailed digital profiles. Their baseball card. It listed strengths, weaknesses, personality traits, thinking styles, analytical, creative, practical, whatever, and crucially, their reliability scores in different areas. These scores were based on past performance and feedback from things like the dot collector.
And this wasn't just for HR reviews. It was used in real-time decision-making.
Exactly. So imagine a meeting about a potential investment strategy. The system could display the relevant baseball cards of the participants.
So if someone's card showed a long, proven track record and high believability in, say, macro forecasting, their input would carry more weight in that discussion.
Precisely. More weight than someone whose strengths lay elsewhere, or who had a lower reliability score in that specific domain. This connects directly to another key concept: believability-weighted decision-making.
Meaning not all opinions are treated equally.
Right. The core idea is that opinions shouldn't be weighted equally just because everyone has one, or because someone is senior. Decisions, especially complex ones, should be weighted based on an individual's demonstrated track record of success and their relevant expertise in the specific area being discussed.
So the person who's consistently nailed economic forecasts gets more say on the economic outlook than someone who hasn't.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's about leveraging demonstrable expertise and track records, not just hierarchy or loudness.
I can definitely see how reducing people to stats on a card, assigning believability weights, how that could feel really cold or dehumanizing from the outside.
It's a very understandable reaction, and the source acknowledges this criticism. But Dalio framed it differently. He saw these systems not as cold, but as maximally efficient, fair, rational, and scalable for making the best possible collective decisions.
His argument was it's actually more human because it prioritizes reality over ego.
Paradoxically, yes. By trying to minimize the distorting effects of ego, office politics, or just listening to the wrong people, the goal was better outcomes for everyone by making the organization a smarter, more effective thinking unit, even if it was emotionally challenging.
And he applied the same self-auditing rigor to himself.
Constantly. He didn't exempt himself. He'd review his own decisions, interactions, failures with the same systematic intensity, like a mechanic inspecting his own engine for faults.
And finding a flaw meant writing a new principle.
Or refining existing one. He didn't just acknowledge his mistakes. He systematically tried to build safeguards against repeating them into his own operating system.
It really sounds like continuous debugging and upgrading of his own mental software.
That's a perfect analogy. Over decades, he built this highly structured, evidence-based personal operating system for living, thinking, deciding, evolving. The source really highlights his genius, not just in finance, but in breaking down life's complexities into understandable systems and repeatable processes learned from facing reality.
And he explicitly links the quality of this thinking to the quality of your life.
Absolutely, that quote is key. The quality of your life depends on the quality of the decisions you make, and the follow-up. And the quality of those decisions depends on your ability to learn from reality. This systemized, principle-based approach isn't just about money. It's about living intentionally, making better choices consistently, and gaining an edge by aligning with how the world actually works.
Okay, so let's pivot slightly. How did this whole systematic, principle-driven approach translate specifically into the world of investing, where Bridgewater made its name?
Well, crucially, Dalio doesn't approach investing by trying to predict the future with certainty. He knows that's impossible in detail. Instead, he studies how large systems, economies, markets, human behavior and markets have behaved over long stretches of history across different environments.
And from that historical understanding, he builds investment philosophies designed for resilience.
Exactly. Resilience is the key word, capable of performing reasonably well across a wide range of potential futures, not just the one you expect.
That mantra really captures it. He who lives by the crystal ball will eat shattered glass.
It's a fantastic line, a stark warning against thinking you can consistently call tops or bottoms or perfectly predict recessions. The goal isn't prediction, it's preparation. Designing your portfolio to survive, maybe even thrive, across many possible economic scenarios.
Which leads directly to his famous all-weather portfolio strategy.
Right. The core idea behind all weather is recognizing that economies move through different environments, different seasons, you could say. Dalio identified four main conditions that define the climate: rising growth, rising inflation, falling inflation.
And most traditional portfolios are biased towards just one or two of those.
Generally, yes. Stocks tend to love rising growth. Bonds often do well when growth and inflation are falling, but they can get hammered in other climates. Dalio wanted a portfolio that was balanced, designed to provide stable returns in all four of those potential economic states.
How do you actually build that?
Through diversification, using a specific mix of asset classes that are expected to behave differently in those different environments, so they balance each other out.
Like what kind of assets?
The typical all-weather mix includes things like a good chunk of long-term government bonds, a smaller slice of global equities, some commodities like oil or grains, and gold. These specific percentages are carefully calculated to try and balance the portfolio's risk exposure across those four economic quadrants. The aim isn't huge returns in any single environment, but consistent, less volatile returns across all of them.
So when one part of the portfolio struggles because of the economic weather, another part is likely doing well, smoothing out the ride.
That's the core principle. And it highlights what Dalio calls the holy grail of investing: diversification.
He has a quote on that, right? Something about uncorrelated streams.
Yeah, it's powerful. With 15 uncorrelated return streams, you can reduce risk by 80% without reducing expected return. That might be slightly simplified math, but the concept is huge. Combining assets whose prices don't move in lockstep dramatically cuts your overall risk without necessarily hurting your long-term expected gains. It's about making outcomes more reliable.
And related to this is risk parity, another Bridgewater innovation. Sounds technical.
It is quite technical in execution, but the basic idea is simple. Instead of allocating capital based just on dollar amounts, you allocate based on how much risk each asset contributes to the portfolio's overall volatility.
So riskier assets get less capital initially.
Or, more accurately, you balance the risk contributions. Stocks are way more volatile than bonds. So a traditional 60-40 stock-bond portfolio gets most of its risk from the stocks. Risk parity says, let's adjust the allocations, maybe using leverage on the less risky assets like bonds, so that each asset class contributes roughly equally to the total portfolio risk.
Aiming for a balanced risk profile, not just a balanced dollar allocation.
Exactly. It's about creating a more stable overall portfolio by balancing the sources of volatility. Math-heavy, but effective for them.
But maybe his most widely influential contribution, at least for the public, is his model of economic cycles. That animated video, How the Economic Machine Works.
Oh yeah, that video is huge. Over 20 million views, used in classrooms everywhere. It provides this clear, systematic way to understand the economy's main drivers, especially the role of credit or debt.
And he breaks it into two main cycles.
Right. The short-term debt cycle, maybe 5-10 years, which is our typical business cycle, the recessions we usually experience. And then the big one, the long-term debt cycle, unfolding over maybe 75, 100 years.
And most recessions are just bumps in that shorter cycle.
Usually, yes, driven by central banks tightening policy to cool things down. But the major crises, think 2008 or the Great Depression, those are the culmination of the long-term debt cycle.
When the debt burden just gets too big.
It's exactly too big to be managed just by lowering interest rates. That triggers a painful deleveraging process, austerity, defaults, restructuring, which can cause depressions.
And the source says Dalio saw 2008 coming because he studied these long cycles?
That's the claim. Not crystal ball gazing, but applying his systematic thinking. Studying history, understanding the mechanics of debt accumulation, how central banks react, how deleveraging unfolds. Knowing where you are in that big cycle is crucial for smart investing and risk management. It's like knowing if you're heading into a hurricane or just a rain shower. Changes everything.
So his investing edge wasn't about predicting tomorrow's news, but building systems and models robust enough to handle the market's known rhythms and inevitable shocks over the long haul.
Precisely. Designing systems to navigate reality, not trying to constantly outguess it. A fundamental shift.
Now we've sort of danced around it, but let's directly revisit the criticisms of Bridgewater's culture. All the systems and clarity talk aside, the human experience there sounds complex, often really hard.
Yeah, the source is very clear about that tension. For some people, Bridgewater was genuinely revolutionary, like a masterclass in rational thinking, changing how they operated forever. But for many others, incredibly challenging.
The radical scrutiny, constant feedback, being quantified.
Right. Overwhelming, stressful, feeling like surveillance, even cult-like. Those descriptions came from former employees, according to the source. The unique norms and intensity took a toll.
The emotional toll is mentioned as significant. The pursuit of clarity had a human cost.
It's a critical point.
Yeah.
And Dalio's response, as noted, is consistent with his principles. He welcomes the criticism. He sees it, even the failure of the culture for some, as part of the truth-seeking journey, part of pushing limits.
Back to that principle, if you're not failing, you're not pushing your limits.
And if you're not pushing your limits, you're not maximizing your potential. He views criticism, like pain, as valuable feedback. Signals areas that need study, understanding, maybe improvement, or maybe just acknowledging it doesn't work for everyone.
And even though he stepped back from day-to-day leadership in 2022, he's still out there sharing his analysis, right? On debt bubbles, geopolitics, capitalism's future.
Absolutely. But beyond Bridgewater's success, his legacy seems focused on sharing that methodology, that pursuit of clarity born from his 1982 failure.
Showing people that life doesn't have to be chaos, it can be understood, maybe even engineered. That pain isn't just bad, it's data. That success comes from systems, honesty, reflection, not just luck or genius.
Yeah, that's why he wrote the books. Principles, Life and Work, the ones on debt crises, on the changing world order. They're all extensions of that core belief. Face reality, understand its mechanics, use principles, and you can thrive even when things get tough.
And that biggest lesson, the meta principle maybe, don't let your ego or your blind spots get in the way of learning.
Because ego hides the truth. It prevents learning. Dalio built his whole thing on chasing truth, relentlessly, sometimes painfully, because he saw it as the ultimate practical advantage.
And he's still updating his principles, the source says.
Because the learning never stops. The pursuit of clarity, refining the system based on new data from reality, it's an ongoing process. There's always more to understand.
Okay, let's pull this all together. Let's recap the key lessons from this deep dive into Dalio's world, maybe framed in a way you, the listener, can think about applying them.
Sounds good. First, maybe take inspiration and consider writing down your own principles. Dalio's real asset wasn't just brains or money. It was the clarity he got from consciously logging lessons learned, especially from failures, and turning them into rules. You can start that process for yourself. What have you learned really works or doesn't in your life? Write it down, test it, refine it.
Second, really internalize that formula. Pain plus reflection equals progress. Every setback, every mistake, it's not just bad luck, it's signal. Feedback. Don't just feel the pain or ignore it. Study it like a scientist. Do that rigorous, honest reflection. Why did this happen? What's the root cause? That analysis is how you turn difficulty into real learning. Remember, his story broke, borrowing from dad to running a massive firm, all driven by studying mistakes.
Third, think about embracing radical truth and transparency. Maybe in your own way, where it fits. Bridgewater's version was extreme, sure, but the core idea is powerful. Facing uncomfortable truths about yourself and your interactions is often the fastest way to grow, even if it hurts short term. Avoiding reality to be polite doesn't help anyone ultimately.
Fourth, Actively work to systematize your thinking. Don't just rely on memory or gut feelings for big decisions. Build processes. Write down your rules, your principles. Use frameworks like that five-step process. Force yourself to think probabilities, root causes, cause and effect. Build your own personal operating system for navigating life's challenges.
Fifth, for investing or managing resources, take his all-weather lessons seriously. You can't predict the future. So prepare for possibilities. Diversify intelligently. Understand the big cycles, like his economic machine. Focus on building robustness, resilience, not just chasing the highest possible return in one specific uncertain future.
And finally, number 6. Accept that reality is the ultimate judge. You can wish things were different, you can believe whatever you want, but success comes from understanding how the world actually works and aligning with it. Fighting reality is guaranteed pain. Dalio's entire system is built on facing reality, however hard.
And maybe his ultimate overarching principle ties it all together. To be successful, you must be radically open-minded and radically willing to confront what is true. Seeking truth, aligning with it, he saw that not just as philosophy, but as the single most powerful practical advantage you can have.
Wow. This has been a really fascinating deep dive into Ray Dalio's mind, his system. He didn't just find success. He feels like he truly engineered it, principle by principle, turning pain into lessons.
It definitely makes you reconsider your own reactions to failure, doesn't it? And the processes you use or maybe don't use for making important decisions.
It really does. So, thinking about everything we've unpacked today, how Dalio turned pain into principles, systematized his life, and firm chased clarity. Here's a final thought for you listening. What's one area in your life where applying a more objective, maybe principle-based approach could genuinely lead to progress? How might you even start identifying and writing down your own principles based on your experiences, your lessons learned from reality?
Something to definitely think about as you navigate your own machine.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this depth dive into Ray Dalio's world of principles and systematic thinking. Keep exploring these ideas, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive.